Good morning, good day, everyone. This is Diane Fodell. Thank you for joining the Cognitive Systems Institute Speaker Series this morning. I'm happy to introduce Chuck Howell. He's the Chief Engineer for Intelligence Programs and Integration at the MITRE Corporation. He was the chair of a DARPA panel refining a research agenda for building trustworthy systems. He was a MITRE lead for a team that developed a set of mission assurance program guidelines for the Missile Defense Agency, and he's been a principal investigator on multiple MITRE research programs addressing various aspects of software assurance, safety cases, and error handling. He co-chaired with my great colleague Frank Stein the fall 2015 and 2016 AAAI workshops on cognitive assistance in government and public sector applications. Help me welcome Chuck today, who will present fairness cases as an accelerant and enabler for cognitive assistance adoption. Chuck, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being our presenter.
Thanks very much. And can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes, okay. Perfectly.
Well, thanks for joining us. Diane, thank you for setting this up and for making the logistics seem so effortless. I'm sure they aren't, but you make it look easy. I'm going to go through what is really just sort of a description of an early exploration into the topic that I'll discuss, and I'm going to deliberately try and leave some time at the end for discussion. That's really what I want to provoke. So let me just set the stage a little bit. This is just one example of what I think a lot of people have seen in a number of different environments, but it's pretty extraordinary, and it's very well documented and very well analyzed. And if anybody wants the links to the more detailed studies about this, please just send me an email message, and I'll be happy to forward them. But the net result was that in Louisiana, where a large number of judges are graduates of LSU, the week after LSU suffered an upset, LSU's football team suffered an upset, not that they lost, but it was an unexpected loss, a statistically significant increase in the sentences handed out to defendants that were found guilty was observed, and this was a trend that persisted over many years. It's not unique. There have been studies that have shown that I think most people know it's better to go before a judge for any kind of a decision right after lunch than just before lunch, because judges, like all of us, get hangry. But when judges get hangry, that can be reflected in sentencing. And it's not just judges where different kinds of cognitive biases show up that affect decisions made that are consequential. Some studies have shown, for example, that there's what they call the gambler's fallacy, that loan officers who approve a loan are 8% more likely to disapprove the next loan application than they would randomly, because of this sort of implicit sense that, well, I don't want to approve everything, and it goes on. So really the bottom line is just there's plenty of evidence that we are flawed people and we make bad decisions sometimes. In addition to the challenges of making bad decisions, there's a terrific social need represented by the backlog that different administrative law judges organizations represent. These are just two examples. There are something like 1 million cases now backlogged for the Social Security Administration. The average turnaround time is 450 days for a review, and this is a review by an administrative law judge. And these represent serious needs of people who are requesting Social Security for injuries, for disabilities, et cetera. So there's a real social cost to that long backlog. Similarly with Medicare, there's a backlog now of 700,000 cases, and that again represents sort of a social cost. So clearly, since this is the cognitive systems discussion, the answer is to replace or at least supplement all those judges with cool, dispassionate AI. What could go wrong? So I suspect some of you have seen this. Again, this is just an illustration, but there is a system called Compass that's used in many states to advise on sentencing with respect to the risks of recidivism for parole and for initial sentencing. And there was a major study done by the journalist organization ProPublica that asserted that the outcome of that system was biased, that it was inherently discriminatory against minority people and differentially benefited white defendants. And again, I don't want to belabor it here. If you're interested, please send me an email. I'll send you links. There's an extraordinary amount of analysis circling around this particular report. ProPublica made its findings, and they did a great job. They provided the Python scripts they used to do the statistical analysis. They provided all of the data that they had access to, and they really showed their work, so to speak, with respect to the statistical analysis that they did to conclude that the system represented inadvertent, not deliberate, bias in its recommendations. Subsequently, the company that sells Compass issued a rebuttal. ProPublica issued a follow-on to that, and then there have been a number of independent analyses of the article and of the Compass system that dive into great detail about whether or not it's biased and under what circumstances and what does that mean. So I don't want to belabor it here. I guess the point I want to make here is just this is a topic of growing concern, and the reason that I labeled this talk the way I did is that there's reason to be concerned that the uptake of cognitive assistance, machine learning-based kinds of systems to facilitate working down the backlog for the Social Security Administration or Medicare and replacing flawed human judgment with, or at least augmenting it with a more objective, dispassionate set of recommendations. Those are all clear social benefits. If we can't convince ourselves and others that there's not implicit bias in those systems, that will be a real headwind and barrier to the adoption of these systems. So that's really the premise. And just to sort of do gilding a little bit, I suspect most of you have seen the white paper that was produced last fall by the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Preparing for the Future of AI, and it has a section on fairness, safety, and governance. This is just an excerpt from it, but it's another illustration of the significance and importance that is put on this topic. And then, just because I'm from the D.C. area, born and raised, I'm very familiar with proof by repeated assertion. So I just want to illustrate that this concern about bias and fairness in AI-based systems is widespread. It's getting a lot of attention, and I think there's a lot of reason to believe that if not better addressed, could result in decisions to not adopt or to really restrict the uptake of what could be a very valuable technology. So there are organizations focused on it. This is an example of a standing series of workshops focused very much on this, and they're all motivated by this notion of opaque black boxes. I don't think anyone believes that there's deliberate intent to add bias, but there is a concern that implicitly or accidentally bias can creep into these systems, and so addressing that, I think, is a really important enabler. So this is just sort of, as I said before, I'm definitely going to leave some time for discussion because this is sort of a work in progress and more an assertion than a firm conclusion. So the first couple, I think, are fairly, I'm on fairly firm ground, which is, as I've discussed, there is a rapidly, and I don't think anybody on this call needs convincing, there's a rapidly accelerating adoption of AI in decision support, and the pace of that adoption even is increasing. I've mentioned some of the concerns that are expressed about the risks of implicit bias. There are absolutely point solutions being explored. There's a lot of effort in, for example, explainable AI or interpretability of models. DARPA and IARPA are putting a lot of research into that. There were a lot of presentations at NIPS 2016, for example, on various aspects of interpretability or explainability for machine learning-based models in particular. What I have not seen as much evidence of is sort of this integrated systems engineering framework for calibrating and communicating confidence that the fairness risks have been addressed. And where I see an analogy that's useful to at least explore is in the safety critical software community, where there is certainly not perfect, certainly continue to advance, but there are a number of tools and techniques and best practices that are pretty well understood that at least some could be very useful as a starting off point for, in effect, making the case that a particular system, both prior to deployment and in operation, is fair. So that's really what I want to talk about for a moment. I just want to take a step back and talk very briefly about the safety critical software community. And so again, it's good to get back to a firm grasp of the obvious periodically. Software is clearly a part of a number of safety critical and life critical systems, and that continues to increase. So there's a clear need to have some sort of confidence that it's not irresponsible to allow that system to be deployed. Risks will never be driven to zero, but there's a need to explicitly and deliberately make a judgment that the benefits outweigh the risks, and then to monitor that system in operation. And one of the points that I think is really important with respect to how all of these tools and techniques that I'm just going to describe very briefly, how they apply to the notion of fairness, is that it's well understood in the safety community that it's a nonsensical thing to ask, is this system safe? That's an unanswerable, overly broad question. So one of the steps that has to be taken in a safety critical environment is to decompose that into a set of hazards or potential hazards and the mitigations against those, and the particular properties or invariants of the system and of the processes used to develop and deploy the system, that it collectively some reviewing authority or regulatory body or even just the owner of the system can use to gain confidence that this system is safe to deploy, acceptably safe. And I think that maps very well to the challenges of persuading various stakeholders that a proposed system or a system in operation is fair. The broad definition of what is fair is very subjective and very difficult to pin down, and it's hard to imagine really having a compelling case against that sort of a broad property that a system is compliant. What is possible is to identify a bunch of specific properties or constraints or potential hazards, potential fairness violations, and then work through what's needed to do to gain adequate confidence that those properties hold or that those invariants are true, both in the process and in the product. And so I'll get back to that in a little bit, but and then the quote from Henry Petrosky there is just widely accepted in the safety critical community, that from the start, systems that are developed that are high consequence, safety critical, have to be subjected both to rigor and scrutiny, that there is a need for a sort of a rigorous, disciplined, repeatable process to assess the confidence that people have, various stakeholders have, that those properties hold, that the system is, in this case, safe. And again, I believe it's the case. I'd like to argue that that's true for the properties related to fairness as well. So this is courtesy of a colleague of mine, Andy Latcher, talking about a very broad topic, which is trust in autonomous systems. Is a system trustworthy? Which encompasses a broad range of different desired properties in addition to fairness. But I think it holds. I won't walk through these, but the obvious point is, as we are talking about making a convincing case that a particular system is fair, the different stakeholders that are interested may have a really different perspective, and you may need to communicate those properties or the argument that the system is fair very differently. This is something that Ed Felton, the the person who really spearheaded the Future of AI study at OSTP, spoke about at the 2016 AAAI workshop that Diane mentioned, that the notion that for these different concerns about fairness, for example, that it's not, there's no one body that you have to convince. There are a bunch of different stakeholders, and that those third-party people of interest, regulators, the people who are going to use it, arguably insurance companies, et cetera. So I think that's another place where these broader issues map to the concerns of fairness. And so I think I've actually, this wall of words is what I think I was just trying to say, that there are various stakeholders. I think the two key stages of this obviously are prior to operation. There's a decision in safety critical systems. Somebody makes a decision that it is not irresponsible to deploy this system, whether it's a regulator or a certification authority. Sometimes it's just the acquirer of the system, in the case of a DoD system, a weapon system. But there's a deliberate and explicit step that says, before we deploy this, we're going to convince ourselves and others that this system meets the requirements we had for safety and the benefits justified deploying. There's also the notion of once it's deployed, perhaps a different set of stakeholders become engaged. So the system is now in operation. Does it continue to justify the confidence we asserted? Does it continue to operate in a way that we understand and predicted? And if not, how do we mitigate that? What are the consequences? So I'll talk about that a little more in a moment, but there are, again, a body of sort of well-understood tools and techniques, not perfect, but probably valuable for this as well. So it's definitely the case that there have been discussions about the intersections between the system safety community and the AI community. There was this workshop that was part of the OSTP process that I mentioned, led by Ed Felton. There are other studies that talk about the application of AI to medical systems or to transportation, as this is an example. I think there's a lot to do even here at the Carnegie Mellon workshop. I was able to participate in that, and it was very clear that there was very little communication at the time between the safety critical systems community and the machine learning community, and lots of opportunities for mutual benefit. But in particular, I think where there are discussions, they tend to focus, not exclusively, but they tend to focus on literally safety critical applications, safety critical implications of the use of machine learning in avionic systems, for example, or in self-driving cars. And so there is some discussion about the safety aspects. There's less discussion, I think, about treating those tools and techniques as sort of agnostic to the critical properties you care about, such as fairness. And so that's where I think there might be some benefit. And again, it's not my intent to give the impression that I think that the safety critical software community has solved all problems and that everything is working perfectly. But it is the case that there are lessons learned and tools and techniques that are used and being advanced. And it's definitely the case that just as it's easier to balance your checkbook using a calculator than it is in Roman numerals, although you could certainly do it with Roman numerals, tools and notations matter, and they can help. And that's one of the places I think we can get some lift from the existing work in the safety critical community. So you can see I sort of started to run out of steam, and it's becoming more of a wall of words and fewer pictures, so sorry about that. These are just examples of some of the tools and techniques that are widely used in the safety critical software domain that I think may be relevant. And I'll just tick them off quickly and then walk through a couple in a little more detail, and then I will, I'd like to leave some time for questions and discussions and suggestions. So in the safety critical community, there's the notion of a safety case or an assurance case, which is the structured collection of claims, evidence, and arguments to make the case to convince a stakeholder that the safety properties hold that the system is safe. And I think that there's a lot of reason to believe that that kind of integrating framework for all the other activities and the way to present a coherent case to a stakeholder would also apply for fairness. Just in passing, I'll note that there are some great examples, tragic examples. Just because you have a safety case does not mean that your system is safe, and in fact, there's a famous investigation a few years ago. There was a plane called the Nimrod. It's a British aircraft that was had a fatal accident in Afghanistan, broke apart in midair, and all the crew were killed. And the after-action analysis was scathing, unbelievably critical of the development of the safety case as the sort of pro forma box-checking exercise that was completely unconnected to the actual system. So nothing can prevent people from doing the wrong thing, but tools and techniques can facilitate or can make it more likely. So that's fairness cases. Hazard analysis is obviously just the attempt to enumerate what are the ways the system could present a hazard, or in this case, a fairness violation. I'll say that there are tools and techniques and notations that are used and that are continuing to be developed in the safety critical community that are a lot more effective and efficient than people brainstorming at a whiteboard about what are the other ways this thing could go wrong. And turn out to be very useful in terms of triggering consideration of unexpected sources of hazards, which I think would be useful for fairness. Once a decision has been made to deploy a system, there are tools and techniques that are pretty well understood, although still being advanced, for instrumentation and monitoring to detect potential anomalies, potential safety violations in operation. So in this case, again, I think there's some interest in mapping that to fairness violations. So systems are rarely perfect. Bad things do happen. When something happens, or where there's a near miss even, there are a lot of tools and techniques that are used in the safety critical community to look at mishap or accident investigations. And I think that, again, there's reason to believe that some of these approaches would be useful in teasing out the subtle causes of, and then what would the mitigation be for apparent fairness violations. And then error handling often is an overlooked sort of, as time permits, will make the system more robust aspect of system development, and time sometimes doesn't permit. So a whole bunch of post-mortem analyses of software failures point back to the error handling framework and as something that wasn't given enough attention in requirements, in design, in implementation, and in test. And that's often where problems lurk, and my hypothesis is that will be the same for fairness violations as well. So I'm just going to really briefly walk past explaining a little more, just a couple of these, just to give a feel for how I think they might be relevant, and then I will mercifully bring it to a close, and I'd really appreciate your feedback now or by email or reach out to me after this. So in the safety critical community, originally there was the notion of a safety case. The term is often broadened to be an assurance case, which is just, as I said, this documented body of evidence that provides a compelling case to some stakeholder that the system is safe as we've mutually agreed to define. There are tools and techniques that are used to support this. This is just one example of a commercial tool that is used in a number of domains, especially in the UK and Europe, but safety cases in general are being adopted in, for example, the Navy for an unmanned vehicle that has safety concerns and other domains. So again, this is sort of along the lines of a Microsoft project. It doesn't do the thinking for you, but it helps you marshal your thoughts and make sure that things are integrated. I want to wrap up quickly, so I'll just blast through these walls of text. There are tools and techniques for hazard analysis, and as I said, the key point here is much more useful than just a bunch of domain experts sitting around a whiteboard sort of dreaming up ways the system might fail or might present a hazard, or in this case, a fairness violation. I think some of those tools and techniques might be relevant, and again, it's a good starting point. There are one advantage of a framework for hazard analysis is it allows you to capture sort of these are the typical ways this kind of system might fail or might present a hazard. I think there's some obvious analogies with fairness and machine learning systems that, as noted here. And then I mentioned accident investigations. For civil aviation accidents or for bridges and things like that, they can be very large and very expensive to do the accident investigation. The key ideas, these are tools like Microsoft Project. They don't do the thinking for you, but they help you marshal your evidence, your alternate competing hypotheses for why something happened. They manage the workflow, et cetera. This one, the NASA Multi-User Investigation Organizer, is actually part of the bundle of software you probably saw announced recently that NASA is making available. And then there are other tools and techniques. Why? Because analysis has been used in the civil aviation community in particular. And so, as must be obvious by now, I am not bringing a silver bullet to the discussion. I'm bringing an assertion or a hypothesis that there's use in looking at the analogies between safety-critical software development and calibration and the concerns over fairness. And I'm very interested in discussing and in investigating further where these match up well, where with some adapting they can be used, and where there's just a gap where they don't fit at all, and the needs are just novel for fairness or for machine learning in general. So it's also good to close with Hallmark card kinds of quotes, but I thought both of these were relevant to the discussion, and I will stop it there, and thank you very much for your interest, and I'll be interested in hearing any suggestions or questions you have.
Thank you, Chuck. That was great. Audience, please press *1 to unmute your line to ask a question. Well, I'll start with a question, Chuck. What is the status of the systems engineering framework for calibrating and mitigating the fairness risks that you mentioned in the beginning? Is such a framework being developed? I would think that Google or the folks working on driverless cars and things like that would be very interested in this kind of technology and framework.
Well, so in the safety critical community, in systems where the consequences of failure, are very obviously perhaps a threat to life, self-driving cars, clinical diagnostic systems, other medical devices, aviation, and other kinds of transportation. I think there is some work going on. I know there is in terms of adapting and extending the current framework on safety-critical software development to include machine learning or other kinds of artificial intelligence. I'm aware of point solutions. There's certainly a lot of research, as I indicated earlier. There are whole workshops on the topic of fairness and accountability in machine learning and other AI-based systems. I think, though, currently they tend to be sort of point solutions in terms of things like adding explainability or interpretability or adding support for audit. And that's where I think the sort of integrated end-to-end framework that the system safety community approaches these things with might be useful. But I'm not aware of that wholesale mapping over to fairness.
Hi, this is. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Are there any frequency issues where you find these are highly probable kinds of issues, and these are the ways that mitigation has worked best?
You mean in terms of sort of like idiomatic ways that systems fail, and therefore?
Could I write heuristic systems out of this?
So that's a great question. There are some tools that try to propose sort of almost like smart checklists or something like that would say, here are a well-understood set of challenges that you're going to need to address, tailored to the specifics of this system. I don't think that I'm not aware of work to take it to the next step and actually sort of automatically generate, if I'm understanding your question correctly, automatically generate the the hazard analysis, for example. But there definitely are well understood sort of idiomatic ways that particular systems in a particular domain fail, and therefore you start out with a pre-populated set of hazards you're going to have to mitigate, for example. Did I answer your question correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
just
you.
a quick. Go ahead. Yeah, I just wanted to say that this connects to the whole issue of bias in AI, including the selection of training sets,
yes.
which was a tremendously widespread discussion at O'Reilly AI last fall. So I'd be interested in being pointed to even more discussions if you happen to have resources, and I'm betting you do.
I absolutely. So if you would, Howell at HOWELL at MITRE.org, and
okay.
I'd be happy to send you some links to existing work. And as a shameless plug, a colleague of mine, LaShawn Booker, and I will be talking about this very same topic, which with much better slides, I promise, less walls of words, at the O'Reilly conference in New York this coming June.
Oh, great. I'm looking forward to it.
Great.
Thank you.
I'll look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Bye.
Audience, thank you for your questions. Chuck, thank you for a great presentation. We will have our call next week, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
Great. Diane, thank you again. Thank you all.
You're welcome.
Take care.